I'd like to welcome everyone officially to What It Takes. I'm Emily Kirsch, founder and CEO of Powerhouse, and so excited, Michael, to have you here on the show. You started New Energy Finance, a research and analysis firm in 2004, serving as chairman and CEO until you sold the company to Bloomberg when it became Bloomberg New Energy Finance in 2009. You're a leading voice on energy and climate, and we're just super excited to have you here. So welcome.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Of course. And you're joining us from Switzerland, right? I know usually you're based in London, but you're in Switzerland now, so it's 8 or 9 p.m.?
That's right. It's 9 p.m. I'm in Switzerland because of the pandemic. We scooped up the kids. We scooped up my mum, who's 89, because we felt that Switzerland probably was going to handle the whole thing pretty well. And that was a good call. That was a good call. Switzerland's done a great job.
Good. Well, I'm happy you're staying safe. Speaking of your family, I want to go way back even before you were around. So I know, and you shared that your parents were Holocaust survivors, your dad from Austria, I believe, and your mom from Czechoslovakia, and they lived in Israel for a while and then moved to London to rebuild their lives. Had your sister, and then in 1963 had you. I know your dad worked as a mechanic and your mom was a nurse before becoming a full-time parent. And at 8 years old, your parents encouraged you to apply to this very prestigious competitive boys' school, and you got in. I also know that even before that, at 3 years old, you started skiing. Your parents were skiers, and you learned in the Czech Republic where your grandparents still lived when you were a kid, and you became obsessed. So I'm curious, what role did your upbringing have? And then your school and skiing. Tell me about all of those things and how that shaped who you were as a kid.
That's a really difficult question to start with, because of course, looking back, I can spin all sorts of stories about how, with that background of Holocaust survivors, my mother was actually in the UK during the war. My father, in fact, was in the British Mandate in Palestine during the war, and he got there as an illegal. And then, with that background of being among the survivors of a family, and there were, about 70 members did not survive, you could always say, well, that made me resilient, and that made me this, and that made me that. I think that's probably over-interpreting. But there's certainly an element of outsiderism, of being, the kid with that background in that amazing school. And that was a school where all the other kids, their parents were doctors, and their parents were solicitors, and their parents were judges, and their parents were civil servants. And there was me with this kind of weird background, and still, going to visit my grandparents in, you said it was Czech Republic. Of course, at the time, it was Czechoslovakia. The Czech Republic and Slovakia had not yet splintered. And so it was Czechoslovakia. And so we were doing these exotic things, and I had this kind of exotic background, but it was not a school where exotic backgrounds were particularly celebrated.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then tell me just a little bit about skiing and the role that played in your life early on, and we'll come back to it because I know that's been a thread of your entire life. But what was it? You started at 3 years old?
That's right. So we lived in the UK from before. My parents had moved there from before I was born, actually around the time my sister was born. And her parents still lived in Czechoslovakia. And she'd been a keen skier. And in fact, her father, my grandfather on my mother's side, had been one of Czechoslovakia's best skiers before the war, and had been a very keen skier also, after the war, had taken it up again. And so when we went there, we went to visit a number of times when I was very little. So that's where I learned to ski at 3. And it was survival skiing. I mean, this was not, this is not Aspen. This was a farmer's field where you either skied or you got caught by the geese. So I skied. And I was pretty fast, it turns out. So I beat the geese, and I'm here to tell the story.
So going to college, you shared that you wanted to study art, but you were told that Jews had to be portable. And so you decided to study mechanical engineering and got into Cambridge, where you focused on thermodynamics and nuclear engineering. And then your parents were always really pro-America, but you had never been to the US. And so a few years after Cambridge, you got this scholarship for Brits to study in the US, and you ventured to the United States to earn an MBA at Harvard. in 1990 is when you graduated. But I'm curious about this scholarship. I think it required that you get a car and drive around the country for a summer. And so I'm curious, tell me about that trip and what did you see and how did that impact the direction of your life?
Right. Well, let me just sort of, that's a huge kind of synopsis of my life, including some sort of slight oddities. It wasn't that I wanted to study art. It was that with that family background, we were not educated and we were certainly not wealthy. I mean, absolutely not wealthy. And so I was only able to stay at that amazing school because I was, lucky enough or focused enough to get a scholarship. And when it came to choosing what to study at university, it was very much my parents' view was, look, we can't help you anymore. You've gone way beyond our capability to help. But what we do know is go get a portable or get a good qualification, engineering, medicine, something that means that you can move around and you will always have that to fall back on. Because I was already saying, hey, I want to go and be a ski bum. And they were saying, fine, go and be a ski bum. But first, get a degree, get something that, that you can fall back on. And I think that, there is a sort of, there is a sense among Holocaust survivors that, Jews have to be excessively self-reliant. If you want to go and study history of art, if you don't have the connections, you don't know that that's a sure thing, maybe not so wise. But I didn't really want to do that. I was very happy. I chose engineering. Basically, my father was a mechanic, and I was going to take a degree. So, what's a mechanic with a degree? Well, that's an engineer. And nobody else from my school did that. And then when I graduated, I was part of a generation in the UK called the brain drain generation, where a lot of people went into financial services or went overseas, and relatively few stayed in engineering because, frankly, it was a very bad time. This is the mid-'80s for UK engineering companies. People, you were badly paid. It was disorganized. It was, if you look at the cars we were producing then, they were, not exactly state of the art. And so it was a tough time. And I went off to be a management consultant, partly because of that, and partly because it meant that I could ski, because that's one of the few careers where you can sort of do some studies and then disappear for a few months and then come back and pick up where you left off. And then after that, I won this amazing scholarship. It's called the Harkness Fellowships. It still exists, but sadly, for reasons I don't fully understand, it kind of almost ran out of money. It used to be the equivalent of the Rhodes. This is for anybody in Britain who was, who had you had to have a very strong academic career, a few years of work and showing some kind of success at work. And you had to be very committed to American-UK relationships. So very similar to the Rhodes Scholars. But I went there, and then shortly after, it kind of blew up. They ran out of money, and it's now a much, much shriveled program. So I tell people, wow, I was a Harkness Fellow, thinking that they'll be, incredibly wowed, the sort of like Bill Clinton, the Rhodes Scholar, that kind of thing. And people just go, huh, what? But it did pay for an entire Harvard MBA, and it did pay for, as you said, driving around America during the summer between 2 years. And it included things like book allowance and insurance and a car allowance. I mean, it was just a magnificent program and a great privilege to have been, one of the final years of people like myself to have won it.
Yeah, and back to the management consulting that you did. Actually, hit pause. We'll come back to that. I know while you were still at Harvard, you wrote this critique of HBS's lack of curriculum that focused on environmental issues. In 1989, you wrote in their student newsletter, "The environment will be an increasingly important business issue throughout our working lives," which today I think everyone listening feels like, yeah, of course, that's obvious. It wasn't obvious in 1989. And so I'm curious, do you feel like your views have become mainstream? And then we'll come back to college days and consulting. Yeah,
I guess going back to that was 1989. So we're now talking 31 years ago. And I suppose in a way it's weird because it doesn't feel like that. But my whole career has been my views, which were, quite provocative and a bit out there, sort of becoming mainstream. And I'd actually forgotten that I wrote that piece. What happened is I wrote two things for the Harvard Business School newspaper. which is called Harbus, the Harbus News. And one was a gossip column, which was fabulous. It was an anonymous gossip column, and it was a fantastic way of sort of settling scores. But the other thing I did was I started a column called Good Business. And the reason I started that was beginning of my second year. I had driven around, I don't know, let's call it 25 states in the US. I drove right around the circumference, and it was a fantastic trip, probably even 30 states, to be honest. And I just was kind of shocked at the state of the environment. And I just remember one incident where I was in Oregon. I'd driven all the way up Route 1 from San Diego right the way up, and I got into Oregon, and I got stuck behind these logging trucks, which are just these vast things. I mean, it's essentially a bunch of huge logs of old growth forest with a cab and a rear, I don't know what to call it, gurney or a rear set of wheels. And I kept getting stuck behind them. And then it started to rain, and the rivers that we were driving alongside, these sort of logging roads or even main roads, the rivers were running brown like hot chocolate. And I just thought, man, I thought America was ahead of this stuff. I thought this is, I came here to learn cutting edge business. And what I'm seeing is actually, fantastic wealth creation, fantastic, business, the finance, the sophistication of Wall Street and the Chicago commodities and all of that stuff. And, at that time, Michael Milken and junk bonds was amazing. But when it came to those businesses that had any interface with the environment, I was really shocked. So I came back and I wrote this column, Good Business, which now seems to be incredibly sort of visionary. And what I was actually doing was criticizing HBS, because I thought that HBS should be getting us ahead of the curve and not simply, fulfill ticking boxes so that we could all go off and work for, the Goldman Sachs's and the McKinseys and the JP Morgans of the world. That there should be something a little bit more progressive going on there. And so I was being provocative, and it turns out I was pretty on the money.
Absolutely, and still are.
Sometimes.
I know. I know that you didn't. So you were thinking about energy and the environment then, but then didn't return to it until 2004, in part because you took this hiatus to return to skiing. And while earning your MBA at Harvard, you were able to participate in the Olympics because moguls became an official Olympic sport at that time. And so you came out of skiing retirement to represent the British ski team. You competed in World Cups in between your exams, and then later competed in the 1992 Olympics. What was it like competing at that level? It sounds like you had this competitive spirit even as a kid to get into and succeed at this prestigious school that you got into, despite not having the wealth and the parental kind of careers that your peers there had. So what was it like competing at that high level? And then what were you like at that time in your life?
Well, I mean, one adjective for me pretty much at any time in my life is probably going to be competitive. I am very competitive. And it's partly also a political philosophy, and it's relevant for the clean energy space, that, we don't need all to hold hands and do kumbaya or whatever. We need to compete because it's under competitive conditions that you push. It's not like I don't compete to beat other people. I compete to push myself. So I was like that at school. I was in this really, this was a highly competitive school. I don't know. If I told you stories about it, you'd be appalled. It would be child abuse. In fact, a lot of it actually technically was, and there's reports on that too. But I was sort of, I lent into it because I am a competitive sort. I have a sister, so I think there's a lot of people out there probably understand, that you either kind of compete or go under. And then the skiing, though, what was odd about it was I just loved skiing, and I loved showing off on skis, which is basically, I was a mogul skier. I was a freestyle skier. I mean, it's like a license to show off on skis. It's fabulous. And I did that. And then I sort of found myself being invited to national team training camps, then being put into the regional competition. So not the World Cup yet, but the Europa Cup, and doing incredibly well, getting results that no Brit had kind of ever, achieved. And partly because it was a very young sport, and, the best skiers had gone off to do alpine and I had done freestyle. And then I sort of thought, okay, look, I have to get serious, that admonition of my parents, you've got to get serious, be a ski bum, sure, but get serious. And I thought, okay, I'm going to I'm going to retire. I'm going to go to business school. I'm going to have this big, well-paid career. And how wonderful that I've done some competitions. And while I was at business school, suddenly my sport, moguls, became an Olympic sport. It was meant to be aerials, but one of the leading aerialists crashed at the when it was a test event in Calgary in '88 while I was at business school. And so then the kind of, the powers that be decided, well, let's take moguls. So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm the British champion, and I've done well at a regional level in a sport which is now Olympic. I mean, who's not going to kind of put a few things on hold and give it a go? And I'm just going to do one thing. I was not Eddie the Eagle, right? I mean, I ended up in the Olympics placing midfield. I think I was 32nd out of about 60. I mean, sometimes I say 32nd out of, I think at the time there was like 5.5 billion of us. So that was pretty good. But I placed midfield. I beat some very good skiers out of, Switzerland and Austria. And, and I could have done a little bit better had I had a better day. But it was an incredible experience. It's also amazing that we're still talking about it. 1992, this is now 28 years later, and it's still, for many, in a way, maybe for other people more than for me, it's a sort of foundational story of Michael. And, it was something I did. I enjoyed it, and I was reasonably good at it, but I was never going to win the Olympics. And in fact, I qualified. I went to Albertville. I then qualified for Lillehammer. There was this time when the Winter Olympics used to be the same year as summer, and then it kind of staggered. So there was only 2 years between Albertville and Lillehammer. And I did one more season after Albertville for fun, did some World Cups, did some ski touring, did some ski climbing, mountaineering, and suddenly found that I had qualified for Lillehammer and actually didn't go because I thought, I'm going to do another 9 or 10 months and I might improve from 32nd place to 22nd place. But frankly, in the grand scheme of things, I kind of felt like I was already, Lillehammer was 90, I'd have been 31. And, you kind of have to worry about Peter Pan syndrome. 31 is too old to be a mediocre, not international competitor, but a midfield international competitor. I mean, you've got to move on and start, getting a little bit more serious. That was a theory.
Yeah. It's certainly foundational, it sounds like, to who you are and who you still are, given this competitive spirit. And so you mentioned consulting at McKinsey because it enabled you to ski when you wanted to for long periods of time. And you spent 5 years as an analyst and manager working on everything from cheese to perfumes to life insurance to food fragrances. And eventually you went from all of that to starting this ski-based travel startup, which became this bigger company. If You Travel, you raised capital at the height of the company. You were worth $30 million, but then in the dot-com bust of 2001, you ended up with $300,000 to your name and you were unemployed. And so I'm curious, what did you learn from the bust? What did you learn from that?
Yeah, well, you make it sound like I'm trying to think of the film character who's sort of done everything. What's his name?
I am horrible
Tom
at
Hanks.
all things film. Okay.
The Tom Hanks character who's sort of there for everything, and I was right there during the dot-com boom bust cycle. So I was at McKinsey, and they were magnificent and let me do my skiing. Then they were a bit less magnificent because some people at McKinsey thought that it was not serious to have this guy continuing to compete and making different life choices to these incredibly focused and competitive people. But I stayed on until 1995, hoping that something bigger and better and obvious would come along, and it didn't. So in the end, I quit. I actually ran a television news agency, Associated Press Television, which was a kind of vast startup turnaround. And I mean, amazing stories of suddenly being hit by bills for satellite uplinks out of Chechnya of millions of dollars that were not in the budget, and having all of the kind of the overhead coming to me and saying what happened. I'm like, well, I don't know. Do I look Chechen to you? And but I then when I left there, I was very committed to doing something on the internet. I actually have been online since before business school. Even before I went to business school, I had actually set up the research house that I was with to use modems and get company accounts online. So I was online before business school, I was online after business school. And then when this thing started to take off, and even the work, you mentioned things like flavors and fragrances and supply chains and so on. A lot of that was shifting. It had been very expensive to automate your supply chain. And then suddenly TCP/IP, internet technology, came along, and it was just like, wow, this is going to be so big. And in fact, it's one of the things that enables the clean energy revolution, the fact that our control costs, instead of having dedicated phone lines and dedicated software, suddenly there's all this stuff which is off the shelf and is very, very cheap because it's packet switched and so on. So I really wanted to do something in the internet, but before I could start something, the valuations started to go kind of crazy. I did start because I wrote a book on skiing called Complete Skier. You can buy it online, usually for 1 penny. Whoever's selling it makes money on the postage. It's a nice little scam going there, but it's still out there if you look for it. Complete Skier by me and my sister. I put that online, and suddenly people were asking me where they should go on holiday, and I was providing leads to a travel agent and selling ski holidays online. And at one point, I had I think we were a top 10 trafficked website in the UK during the winter because we had snow reports, which I had sort of kind of borrowed without explaining what the internet was from various people who had snow reports. But I didn't want to run that business. You know, skiing businesses are not, at least in the UK, they're not serious businesses. It's seasonal, it's minority, it's just not serious. And everybody in the end goes bankrupt. So I raised money from Bernard Arnault, who was building a portfolio of businesses. I brought in a professional team, and I joined Arnault's family company called Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, LVMH, and I ran his tech investments for about as long as it took for the dot-com bubble to completely blow up, which was also a very good experience. Also, that has been very helpful when I built New Energy Finance, and actually, frankly, as I coach angel company CEOs now through COVID, I strongly recommend living through a most massive recession to every business person because it will set you up for life as long as you learn the lessons. And so I was at one point, I owned some options in all of the internet companies that Bernard Arnault had invested in. On paper, it was worth $30 million. I didn't for an instant believe it was worth that. I thought I would get 10% of that out. I thought I'd be able to kind of navigate the boom bust, which was quite obviously going to happen, and get out with maybe $3 million, and that would be that would be what I used to start my next venture. And I lost 99% of it. I didn't get 10% out. I got 1% out, and found myself unemployed and unemployable. Just an extraordinary situation. There's me. I have this marvelous resume, and I've got this prize and that prize, and Harvard and Cambridge, and firsts in this, and prizes for thermodynamics, and Baker Scholarship, and I can't get a job, and my money is just going down, 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 down. So that was interesting.
That's rough. And at that time,
I was very angry. I tell you, it was not a good time personally. It's very destabilizing going through that sort of thing.
Yeah. I know too, as you were watching your bank account dwindle in 2003, I believe you were in Bolivia and in Brazil, and you were witnessing all of this aging energy infrastructure. And as a climber and a skier, you were seeing the impacts of incumbent energy pollution and impact on snowpack, and things like visibility were compromised. And you knew about alternatives like wind and solar, and you had all this experience calculating experience curves, and you knew that renewables were going to get cheaper and cheaper and eventually cross over. And then you also saw this market gap that a market gap for data and clean energy resources, for finance and energy industries, that just wasn't being met by anybody else. And so in 2004, in your words, you lowered yourself further into the abyss of not having any money and not knowing exactly what to do. And you started New Energy Finance with your other unemployed friend. And so many people ask themselves, should I have an idea, should I start a company? But they decide not to. And so I'm curious, what made you answer yes to that question, should I start this company?
Well, yeah. So once again, I mean, there's a great job of kind of compressing a lot of things that I did. I didn't just sort of sit there going, oh my goodness, I've got $300,000 and everybody I know is now unemployed. My Rolodex has been, sort of neutron bombed and I don't know what's going to happen. I thought that, but I also spent some time traveling. I was applying for jobs. I was trying to get jobs because I was aware that at some point I will, have to move back with my parents and those sorts of things. And you referred to sort of lowering yourself into the void. There's a fantastic story, some of your listeners will know it, called Touching the Void by Joe Simpson. And he climbs, and it's a huge, great saga. But fundamentally, he ends up with a broken leg, in a crevasse. His climbing buddy has had to cut the rope and leave, and he's halfway down, and he's going to die. He can't climb out. And what he does is to say, well, I got one option here. The option value, I mean, you could call it, perhaps it's a sort of Nouriel Roubini anti-fragile with this, you can either die or maybe not die. And so he lowers himself into the abyss. And then he finds that he can drag himself along and out. And hence you get the Hollywood film and the book and all those sorts of things. So I sort of felt like, okay, I can eke out my money, but I'm not being successful in the job hunt. And everything that I found interesting seemed to be energy related. There seemed to be either problems, so aging infrastructure, power cuts. At the time, people talked about peak oil, so it looked like there was going to be depletion of oil, pollution, local pollution. I had time to read about climate change, and although I'm a natural sort of skeptical person, I sort of came away thinking, actually, because I started by saying, well, it's gone up by 0.6 of a degree in the last century. It's no biggie. And then I thought, well, hang on a second, 0.6 of a degree is actually a lot in a century. And it hasn't, and so I started to read around it. And then I could see potential solutions. I was totally ignorant about wind and solar, other than I had, done a little bit of sort of aeronautics and during my time in Cambridge, some fluid dynamics. Mainly what caught my attention was the talk about the hydrogen revolution. In 2003, that we were all going to go to hydrogen. And so I started to say, well, is there a company I could run, or is there something I could do that will that will rebuild my horrible, wrecked, trashed career, and something that would be a sort of safe environment for me to do something. I quite quickly decided that the hydrogen revolution was not a thing in 2003, 2004. And so broadened to talk about clean energy technologies right across the board. And very quickly, I mean, by 2005, it was clear that, I hit a mega trend. I had been ahead of the curve. And it wasn't, interesting, in 2005, nobody had a budget to subscribe to a clean energy information service, but they all told me that I was doing, that they wished they had. And by 2006, it started to kind of, the business started to fly. So we did, 2007, I think we hit £1 million of sales. And by 2009, but 2006 was the first million. 2007 was 3 million, then 7.5, and then 10 million, and then we sold. So it was very, very rapid from the point from about 2005, it became very, very fast.
Yeah, I learned that year one, so in 2004, revenue was £2,000. And your initial team was a bunch of interns who you were paying £10 per day in cash to do all this data input. They were working in your living room. You had borrowed some money from your brother-in-law. You were paying the interns with your own savings. Your co-founder, who was also previously unemployed, you were all just scrapping together to make it happen. And then the next year you went from £2,000 to £175,000, and then that trajectory that you just laid out. And so you didn't end up raising money for the first 2 years of the company until 2006, when I believe you took on debt. But is it correct that you never raised venture capital? And if so, why not? No.
Okay, so I had really suffered a very substantial sort of loss of confidence. So the idea of, starting this business, losing money every month, and going and raising venture capital. And I had some bad experiences with venture capital during that whole .com period. I mean, people who invited me in, had me present, and then told me that they weren't going to invest, but they were doing due diligence on a competitor that they wanted to invest in. So, I mean, really ugly things. And if you want to know who that is, you can put it in the show notes. but he still has a very good career today, but I'll get him one day. Not that I'm competitive. But
Clearly.
I started the business, and I was putting in, I think it was £7,000 or £8,000 a month. I'm sitting there on, let's say, $300,000, £200,000, and I'm covering my living costs and putting in $7,000 a month, and my bank balance going down and down. I had to borrow. When I sold the business eventually, the very next day, I paid off my brother-in-law and American Express. So yeah, it was pretty, I call it entrepreneurship. We were using it in interns, paying them £10 a day. And one of the criteria for choosing interns was you had to have your own laptop. And then one time we found a super intern. She was absolutely our favorite intern ever because she had 2 laptops. So that was how we did it. And I think now you probably wouldn't be allowed to do that. At the time, you kind of could. And what we did a few things when we really involved the interns in the business. They chose the brand, they chose the name, they were in the discussions, strategic discussions. Quite a few of them, I'm going to guess half a dozen interns from that period are actually still with Bloomberg NEF. And they know who they are, and they were just, brilliant at growing with the business. But yeah, I can remember one time there was actually it was not a bomb attack, it was the copycat attack of the London 7/7 bombs, and there was a cordon thrown around our office, which was in a very dodgy part of town, and I had to kind of find a back way in with a whole pile of £10 notes, and then I went and I paid everybody who was working in this former chocolate factory. And so that's how we did it. And, there's probably over the course of the years, literally hundreds of interns that had their first jobs. And then we would move them on. After about 8 or 10 weeks, we would move them on because it's very abusive. There's a great deal that says you'll learn a lot, but you'll work for £10 a day. But when you really like somebody and they're doing effectively a job, you've got to say, okay, we're gonna hire you, or I don't have the money, and we moved them on. So we did a bunch of that. I think we held on to some of the good ones though.
What exactly was the product early on, and what was the business model?
So to start with, because I'm a sort of left brain data guy, the product to start with was a database. So we took every investment that we could find in clean energy, and we did what I called extracting the DNA. So we took all of the kind of who was the investor, who was the investee, who was the debt provider, and we put all of that into very structured data sets manually. I mean, now you could probably get a bunch of it done with machine learning, which didn't exist then. What I very quickly discovered was when I showed it to people, they said, wow, this is great, I got to have this. And so I would set them up with an account so that they could use it, and I could see from the service statistics that they didn't. And the reason is to do with databases are difficult. The big investment when you sign up to any of these services is not the subscription, it's your time getting to know how to use it. And knowing that, yes, my boss is busting my chops and I got to get some data, and you've got to be confident that it's worth the 20 minutes to get it out of New Energy Finance. And so we started to write newsletters to highlight what was in there and to kind of show, well, you could do trends in investment in different types of biofuels, or you could look at which countries were investing more in, the US was doing more thin film solar and China was doing silicon solar, and you could sort of set up a little tension there and write a story. And so that was through 2006. So 4, 5, 6, we did data, and then we did newsletters. And then in 2007, very lucky, a guy called Ken Bruder, who was a former HBS guy, came through the door at random and said, you're crazy. You should be selling insight. You need to sell insight services because you know so much. And I thought, okay, what is an insight service? We launched that and that's, market size, price forecasting, supply chain analysis, to the more kind of, forward-looking stuff. We launched that in 2007, and it flew to the point where, by April 2009, we were in a sale process of the business. So we really only ran our main product for 2 years before selling, 2.5 years before selling. And selling, it was a good sale, I think, for all round, for the buyer and for us.
Yeah, coming out of, what was an early, what you've described as a failure in your career, and then to have this kind of exit, what was that like for you? And then also, what was it like post acquisition? I know that can be a tenuous time, so I'm curious what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, the exit process was unbelievably stressful. Hang on, so I'm just checking that I am recording. Sorry, I apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's good. Sorry. So
the
exit process, the exit process was incredibly stressful, because we did a competitive auction, of course, and then there comes a point where it was absolutely clear that Bloomberg would be a magnificent owner for this, and it was also the best deal for the shareholders and for the staff, which is very important to me. So you go exclusive, and then you are extremely exposed. It's not that you have to lower yourself into the abyss, but you are tightrope walking across to the closing of the deal. So it was very, very stressful. And like any deal, there's always sort of odd things and issues that get thrown up by due diligence and whatever. And so you navigate through that. And I was very aware that the Copenhagen Climate Conference was sort of barreling towards us, and I was personally very pessimistic about that. So I really wanted the deal closed. It closed on day 2 of that conference at 7:30 at night on the 9th of December 2009. Not that I remember. And I was left sort of almost like wandering the streets, going, "I'm rich." Nobody in my family's ever been rich. My father was a mechanic, my mum was a nurse, and what an extraordinary destabilizing or sort of odd sensation. And I went home where my wife was waiting, and then suddenly the phone rang, and it was actually Dan Doctoroff, the president of Bloomberg, saying, "I just want to say I'm really delighted we completed the deal, and I'm going to be heading over to the UK. You must be out celebrating." And I said, "Dan, thanks so much for the call. I really appreciate you thinking of me at this point and coming over tomorrow to welcome my team. But actually, I'm eating a baked potato at home." I was so wrung out and so exhausted that was the best I could do in terms of celebration, a baked potato. But it was a good baked potato. And, the next day I paid off my brother-in-law. I paid off American Express. And, the handover, the post-merger acquisition, post-acquisition sort of merging of the teams and so on, I had done some of that work at McKinsey. There's all these sort of historic things that I had actually done. I'd worked as a consultant on post-merger situations. And so I was very aware that it's quite easy for the two sides to become, tense, and us and them to persist. I worked in one case at McKinsey where 10 years later, the two companies that had merged still referred to each other as us and them.
Wow.
And them and us. So I coached the team. I said, look, there are certain things where we have to put our foot down because we understand our business, we understand our clients, we understand the data sets. And so there are some things that, that could go really badly wrong. So those were the what do we call them? We call them the BMWs and the BCWs. I can't remember what it stood for, but it was the things we had to dig in over, and the things that we didn't have to dig in over, that we could say, okay, look, we would rather, do this or do that. But actually, it's really not worth falling out with our new owners. I did a lot of explicit coaching in those early years because I ran it as CEO from 2009 until 2014, I think it was. Yeah. So, 4 or 5 years. But I had an amazing team. I mean, I couldn't have done it. I've got, there's John Moore, who's still, running it now, who's doing a magnificent job. And he was my COO. He was my number 2. So I was able to sort of, and Bloomberg, to their credit, just kind of let me get on with stuff. They let me get away with things that very few people within Bloomberg are allowed to do. It's a very structured organization. But I was allowed to sort of, not check in every morning and go off to conferences without having to go through multiple layers of permissions and so on. So they had me report to an exceptionally wise executive, and it worked well. And then by 2014, I dropped down to halftime almost, well, I was chairman of the advisory board. It was almost like an executive chairman role. And then 2017, I became just a senior contributor, which is what I am now. No executive role, but I do write once every quarter, and I try to kind of stir things up and provoke the sector, and also, you know, help to pull together some strains and some threads within the Bloomberg New Energy Finance output, which I still think is the best in the world. So I try to build on that and take the story one step further each time.
While you're doing all of this in your career, you're also an industry thought leader, and you're a partner, and you're a parent. And what was it like to do all of those things at the same time?
Busy, definitely busy, because I met my wife, who actually was she was a contractor with New Energy Finance. Didn't work directly for me, and so, you know, that became a thing, and that also had to be managed, which was, you know, we had to again put some time and energy and work with the remuneration committee and tell people in the right way within the company. She actually fell pregnant with our eldest. Our eldest was born in August 2009, so about 3-4 months before we sold it. Actually, my eldest was the youngest delegate at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. She was there. She was about 4 months old. I think in general, and I did, you know, I had always done some, I don't know, you call it industry thought leadership, but really part of my strategy as New Energy Finance to market the business was to try to get very close to some of the great names like the UN and the World Economic Forum and so on, because we were asking for a subscription which was way bigger than most subscriptions. This is not a FT subscription. This was, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. And we needed to give the analysts who really, really needed it, had to go to their boss, to the, you know, managing director, vice president, whatever, and justify it. And I figured that was just a lot easier if they could say, well, you know, this is the guy that, you know, he's on the UN Secretary General's high-level group for sustainable energy for all, or they write that report. They wrote the Green Finance report for World Economic Forum. So I was doing a bunch of essentially pro bono thought leadership, but it wasn't pro bono. It was what I did for branding, and I have kept that going. I'm now on a number of sort of, you know, I'm one of the commissioners on the IEA's Commission on Urgent Energy Efficiency. Is it marketing anymore? Is it thought leadership? I don't know. I mean, it's also partly just hanging out with my mates. I've got to know so many of these people so well. It wouldn't cross my mind not to always do that. So I suppose just one thing I would say, it's been a theme throughout my career. You can do a lot more than you think. So when I was at McKinsey, I was competing in the World Cup and I wrote a book on skiing. And yeah, I probably went to the pub a little bit less often than, you know, than I would otherwise have done. But, you know, I've always, even when I was building New Energy Finance, I don't even know, I don't know if, so I was, I don't know if it's known, but I was also first a trustee and then chairman of a medical charity, the leading charity for colorectal research in the UK, the St. Mark's Hospital Foundation. St. Mark's is an amazing hospital that treated Charles Dickens's piles. It's been going for 180 odd years. And I helped to professionalize their fundraising and raise, I don't know, probably 15 million pounds during that, you know, during that period. You can do these things if you just sort of don't take no for an answer. And obviously you have to work pretty darn hard. And, you know, there's some sacrifices, there's some costs. Perhaps, you know, if my wife was here, you could ask whether she enjoyed every moment of having me do all these crazy things. But, you know, we only get one pass through this life. I don't watch game shows. I don't watch TV series. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I've just kind of got rid of. And maybe that's what frees me up to do a few more crazy things than the average bear.
Makes sense to me. Speaking of average bears, we're going to move into and close with our high voltage round. These are quick questions, really quick answers. Starting with, if you were going to be an animal, what animal would you be and why?
Goodness, that is okay. I'm going to stall for time while I think. I'm I'm just obsessed at the moment with our new boxer dog. She's the Swiss Army knife of dogs. She can do a bit of everything, and she's absolutely fantastic. My wife didn't tell me we were getting a boxer dog because she was afraid that I would object because I was too busy. But I absolutely adore her, and I think she has a pretty good life. So, boxer dog.
Swiss Army knife seems applicable to you. If you had to start a completely different new career tomorrow, what would it be?
A completely different career. I'm actually going to, in a sense, I'm almost going to refuse to do that because I've worked so hard to put together this portfolio of activities, angel investing, advising big corporates, hanging out with my friends, these incredibly influential and amazing people, writing, which I hate writing, but I love having written. And so, I mean, if you said to me I couldn't do any of those things, then I don't know, I'd have to become a Trappist monk or something. I'd have to do something really crazed, I guess. I do want to write a book. Maybe I should stop doing those things and just focus and just write one, great book, which would be, I don't know what it would be on. Well, it would be on this transformation and the future, and it would be optimistic and scary and provocative, and then I could sort of retire, and I don't know what I'd do.
Hard to imagine you retiring, but
Yeah.
maybe one day. Other than the .com business that went under, when have you failed?
Oh, lots of things. So I failed my driving test. I could barely see over the steering wheel, so it's not too surprising. So I failed my driving test. I failed I failed one of my maths. At the time, you did these things called A levels, which people still do, but you did extra exams called S levels, and I got a U, which means uncharted or unclassified. So I failed that. I failed first year electrical engineering at Cambridge, which is quite sort of funny, I guess, given what I've ended up doing. To my credit, in the second year there were 2 electrical engineering papers, and I aced those. What else have I failed at? I mean, I probably fail all the time. As I'm not the perfect father. I didn't win the Olympics. There's plenty of things that if I had my time again, I would love to do better. But those are probably the out and out failures that I can think of.
What is something that you thought was true that you no longer believe?
I thought I had all the time in the world until I was about 12. And now after that, I know that we don't. We definitely don't. We get whatever it's going to be, 70, 80, 90 years. I'm not a big believer in transhumanism. And I think we should try and leave the planet a better place than we found it. And we should try and be a good person. I don't really know why. I'm not a religious person, but I have a very strong belief that we should try to be good to each other, good to the planet. So I think I probably used to believe, to be honest, I also probably believed a whole load of really stupid things about people that are completely unacceptable and untenable. I don't think I was ever the worst person, but I grew up in the 1970s, 1980s, and I certainly shared some of those attitudes. I tried to deprogram myself explicitly from those. And going back to the failure point, I'm sure I haven't succeeded fully, but I definitely used to believe or just accept a load of stuff that I'm sort of glad I no longer believe.
Well said. What would you say is your worst trait?
Giving long answers to rapid fire questions. I can be pretty aggressive. I can be pretty intolerant.
That was so good. You could just stop there.
Yeah, I could have stopped there, but it was a glib answer, and I don't want to be glib. I think I can be pretty. I think people who have worked for or with me, many of them find it really exhilarating because it's not that I'm all over the place, but I am a blowtorch and I am directed and I want to get stuff done and I want to judge by results. There are some people who have historically found that very unpleasant, very difficult. I'm completely aware of that. I'm not proud of it. And I would say that's probably my flexibility in choosing different styles of influence is not maybe my strongest suite.
I can understand and relate. If you were going to change just one thing about the world, if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
Um, I'm fundamentally optimistic. I actually think that we will address. I mean, the thing that concerns me is, of course, planetary boundaries. I'm also very concerned about issues of inclusion. I think on the planetary boundaries, I feel optimistic that we'll land this thing at about 2 degrees. It won't be 1.5 degrees. And some people watching this will be, how can you call that optimistic? There's going to be terrible suffering. And particularly he says he's interested in inclusion, but the people who will suffer will be the people who have least. And all of that is true. I am optimistic. I would love to see more rapid progress. I'd love to be able to, and I think, by the way, I think that the secret to that lies in information. The secret to that lies in, if you can, just peeling the onion away and getting to the core of, I started New Energy Finance to make some money. I wanted to do it whilst not doing horrible damage to anything. So I wouldn't have done New Coal Finance, but I did New Energy Finance. I wanted to make money. I needed to redeem my career. But I think if you look at the influence that I've been privileged to have through New Energy Finance, that team that has now become Bloomberg NEF, and the things that I've been able to do in Africa and all sorts, if I had set out to have the greatest impact possible in the world, I think I'd have started an information provider and sold that information commercially to clients who use it, not an NGO, not a policy house, nothing, because I think that information is just a great disinfectant. We're on the right side of history. The arc of progress is in our favor. And so you just look at ways of speeding that up. And I think information, if I can keep telling stories, narrating, maybe embarrassing a few people who are trying to block it. I've got broad shoulders. I don't mind getting into a bit of a fight with some people, as a few people out there probably noticed. I don't mean ill, but I do a bit of culture hacking. I just want to do more of that.
If there was just one person who was going to hear this podcast, who would you want it to be?
Oh gosh. If they don't have to be a live person, I would love for my grandmother to hear it. My grandparents, the 4 of them, 3 died when I was pretty young. 1 died when I was actually at business school, my grandmother on my mother's side. I'd love her to listen to it, and then I could try and explain what the hell it was all about. And my dad as well, because, when I left McKinsey, he thought I had essentially thrown my whole career and my life away. And actually, it's been pretty good. If I look at what I've got now, wife, children, business, respect, being, honored to be on this sort of show, I'd love to tell him about that. In terms of content for helping to accelerate this agenda, it doesn't really do that because it's a load of stories from my background. So whoever wants to watch it, if people like it, they like it, and I'm very happy, and it's been great.
Finish these sentences for me. Companies fail because
entrepreneurs are not always prepared to do what it takes to succeed.
If you really knew me, you would know
that some of the stuff I say, I'm floating a trial balloon and I don't yet believe 100%.
Success is?
Success is being a whole person. And by that I mean not having to wear a mask while you're at work to try to hide your emotions or to work on stuff you don't enjoy, and then to have to try and spend the weekends making up to your children, to bring it all together, live one life, be intellectually coherent as you can be, and if you don't like your job, quit tomorrow.
I'm most proud of?
I think professionally, New Energy Finance, it's going to be very hard to match that. For those who are rugby fans, you'll remember in 2003 when the England team won the World Cup, and there was this extraordinary Johnny Wilkinson drop goal right in the last few seconds. The ball came back to him. He cleared it. He scored the drop goal, and the world erupted, and his life was changed. And I'm sure he's a good guy, and I'm sure he's very proud of other things he's done, but he'll never be able to recreate that. And I think I'll never be able to recreate new energy finance was lightning in a bottle. The people, just it was just so exciting. There were so many good people. We fired people that we thought were, we had this thing called the AFZ, the asshole free zone. And I fired I'm not sure if I should say what his role was, but I fired somebody who was a director level hire because he was just being brutal to some of the support staff. Mainly they were women, and I didn't think that he was a good person. And we suspended him, and he resigned while he was on furlough. And the ability to do that and to be growing your revenues at 500% a year and to be working on the right issues in the world. I don't know that I'll ever professionally be able to recreate that. I'm incredibly proud, and I'm proud of those hundreds of interns who started with me and who are now senior vice presidents at investment banks, or they're working on projects in Africa, or they're doing whatever they're doing. Some of them are not doing anything in clean energy, but I hope they will remember that we just had this moment in time.
Last question, what it takes to build.
Can I just say that was my professional thing. And I got to say also, I'm not the perfect, husband and father, but I do some things right. And so I'd like a little tiny bit of credit. If my kids ever watch this, I want them to say, okay, we weren't new energy finance, but we turned out okay.
I'm sure they will. Last question to close, to build a successful startup, what it takes is?
I think to build a successful startup, it requires 360 degrees. You've got to have a lot of luck, but you've also got to do. You've got to have the right investors. You've got to have the right market. You've got to make the right hires. You've got to develop the right product. You've really got to do a bunch of things. I actually wrote a piece on this. I wrote the 5 jobs of the startup or the rapid growth CEO, because there are some things that you have to do and some things you have to delegate. But above all, I think you've got to really not kid yourself. You've got to not kid yourself, because you might love doing marketing or PR, but actually the product just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And you can't kid yourself. You might be great at raising money. I mean, we're filming this in the week that Nikola Motors, the market cap went to $33 billion. And I know that Trevor Milton is as high as a kite on the success of this incredible reverse IPO. And he hasn't got a clue what is coming down the track in terms of how hard it will be for him to deliver that business. So don't kid yourself. And then I think there's some other things. Physical stamina. I was really lucky, maybe because of the sports career, but being able to be first in and last home, or being able to get out of bed 4 a.m, get to the airport, get to that conference, shine in front of the investors when you really don't feel like shining, and just not getting ill, and not having mental health issues, being strong mentally, I don't know of enough that has been written about those issues for entrepreneurs. That's the foundation that you build entrepreneurship on, is your personal ability to kind of, just keep going. Just so that, like the Duracell bunny, you just got to keep going. Because if you stop, your team definitely stops.
Well said. Well, this has been amazing and such an honor to talk with you and have this much time with you. I have followed your work from the beginning of my career in this industry, so it means a lot to have this connection and to know how many people will hear this and hopefully be as inspired as I am by it. So thank you. And I hope your time with your family in Switzerland keeps going well and safely, and tell your mom we say hello and thank you. And I look forward to hopefully doing something like this again soon.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you. And, I strongly suspect that there will come a time in the not too distant future where you will be the one being, honored and lauded and put on a pedestal and so on. And hopefully some of your portfolio companies as well. But it's been a great pleasure talking to you. It really has.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. And I know it's late, so have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Have a most favorite or least favorite question?
The difficult one, I confess I hadn't listened all the way through to the rapid fire, so I was a bit thrown by the rapid fire.
I can tell, but I don't want people to know. It's better when people don't know that that's coming, because it's meant to be just off the cuff and from the heart. So
yeah. No, I mean, it was, and I do think that there is a lot of stuff, just the stuff about physical stamina and mental health. There's not nearly enough, because I think all these bros have got to try and pretend that they're all, immortal transhumanists living forever, but actually you go through these incredible ups and downs. And the question of how do you lead a team? How do you give teams want certainty, but you can't give a team certainty. You can't say, I know exactly how we're going to build this business, what products we're going to build, and I know even who we're going to sell it to, and I know how much we're going to sell it to, and I know how much your options are going to be worth. You just can't do that. So how do you, how do you give enough certainty? And basically what I did was I said, look, I don't know these. There's a ton of things I don't know. What I do know is we're smarter than all the other folks. We're more nimble. We're in the right space. We've done a lot of things right. And some good things will happen. And we will make some money because, it's a great sector and blah, blah, blah. So just kind of, there's an element of trust me that you have to be able to, and I think you get more trust by admitting the uncertainty. If you have to try and pretend that you know everything at all times, like a politician, never say sorry, never this, never that. I mean, it's the times when you lose a contract that you have to talk to your people and say, well, there are 4 other oil companies. We're going to get, at least 2 of them, and so on. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff in there. So I like that question about the kind of what does it take?
Yeah. Also, I know a bunch of people are still tuning in, which this is probably the funnest part. It's like, they're just talking now. It's like not an interview, but yeah, still technically a bunch of people on, which I think is fun. But just so you know, so you don't, right. Don't share anything you regret in front of
listen,
the 80 plus people who are still on.
But that's the other thing is about being if you try to be an integrated person, then you don't say things that you regret. You just don't say those things. Why? If you know what you're doing, and if you've got the same attitude to whether it's to social attitudes or your same views on energy sectors or then you actually, it's much harder. Of course, I say stupid things all the time, but it's much harder to get really caught out if you are never pretending, because you've just got one persona. My kids get it. My employees, that's it. One persona. What you see is what you get.
Yeah. You know what we didn't get to that I really wanted to cover was the rumor of you running for mayor of London.
Oh.
Would you ever run again? Or would you ever run, period?
I thought about it very seriously. So it is a proper rumor, which I worked pretty hard to get out there. It was around 2015. Obviously, Boris was coming to the end of his 2 terms as mayor. And I was very concerned. First of all, I'm through and through Londoner, and I've got lots of things. I've got a backstory. I've created jobs. I've done the Olympics, London's an Olympic city. I've been, on the board of Transport for London, so I actually know, how to do a few things. There's a load of stuff and I had worked on, on the board. Some of it has actually come out that I've actually done a lot of work on road safety and bus safety. And actually, that's why I'm not on the board anymore. It was because I was becoming painful about some issues that are very, close to my heart, which I was working on, back to 2014. Actually, I've called Transport for London institutionally unsafe, not the tube, but the buses and the streets, because there's a lot of things in the way they're set up to give out contracts, which absolve TfL of responsibility. And actually, we've now got definitely known 43 transport workers who've died of COVID that were contractors to TfL, but TfL took no responsibility fundamentally for their safety. Just as well, we're not their direct employer, so it's why you what could we possibly have done kind of attitude. So I have a lot of backstory. I thought about it very seriously. It wasn't the right time in 2015. I actually would like to make some more money. So, some of the angel investments and building Liebreich associates to get some more of those kids are expensive, like really, really expensive. And so it would have been quite an indulgence. And the UK media environment is pretty caustic. So, do you want people taking photographs through your front windows? Do you want people commenting on your, did I want people commenting on my wife's clothing every time she maybe went out to the gym or something, just stupid stuff, unacceptable stuff that happens, all the time in the UK, sadly, and to a certain extent in the US. And so I decided against it in 2015. Also, the other thing was that Zach Goldsmith, who's a great friend, I think should have been a much better candidate than me. He's taller, he's richer, he's better looking. And unfortunately, his campaign sort of, first it never really took off. And then he got, some of the contractors who ran his campaign went off on this kind of, Sadiq Khan, can you trust London with him? Essentially subtext being because he's Muslim. I find that absolutely offensive. I found it offensive at the time. So, there's many things wrong with Sadiq Khan as a mayor. Many, don't get me started. But one of them is not the fact that he's a Muslim. That is of no relevance whatsoever. And so, but there was a lot of, I think that there was, it was a very poor and divisive campaign. And I think that Zach could and should have put his foot down and stopped it earlier, but he didn't win. Would I ever do it again? Would I ever, get all spooled up, ready to go? And the answer is yes, I would potentially. I decided not to do it in 2020 because, young kids, and for all the reasons, it wasn't right in 2016, it wasn't right in 2020. But, 2024, I seriously hope that Sean Bailey, the Conservative candidate, is, the mayor, and I hope he's entering his second term, and I would do anything I can to, support him in that endeavor. But if he isn't, and the field is open, I think the way Boris puts it is if the ball comes loose at the back of the scrum in 2024, then I might well do it. And I've got, the sustainability brief. I mean, it's just insane that, you've got Sadiq Khan. Part of his manifesto for the 2020 election, which has been postponed to 2021, was that London will be carbon neutral by 2030. I mean, he doesn't decide that. He doesn't decide whether I use gas or a heat pump, and turns out I use both. But he doesn't buy the fuel in all those private vehicles. He has a very limited amount of influence. And in no way are we going to be carbon neutral by 2030. It's an act of the most extraordinary cynicism to say that we are. I mean, in 2016, he said that they would be planting 2 million trees. And actually, he's planted, by the time he kicked off the campaign for the re-election, they were at something like 10% of that. I mean, this cynicism. So would I stand? Yeah, I would, because I would try and be one person. I would apologize if I can't deliver. I would say what I'm going to say, and I would try and be a mayor the same way that I've been an entrepreneur, and the same way that I've been a father. Not perfect, but hopefully better than rubbish.
You mentioned you touched on this just now, and then I wanted to go deeper on it when we were talking around issues of diversity and inclusion, and obviously that is very much at the surface now in the U.S. and around the world. And so just would love to hear more of that. It also sounds like you had this really profound evolution yourself of what you were raised with and beliefs that you had to actively dismantle. So would just love to hear more about that, and then kind of where you are now, especially in light of everything happening in the world. Yeah, and I think, as I say, if you go back to the 1970s, sexism, homophobia, I mean, I'm not even going to say the words because I find them, I find it sort of safer not to. But if you look at things like the brands of marmalade, and if you look this up offline, there'll be some people in the audience who know what I'm talking about. There was a brand which was basically included a racial epithet in the brand of marmalade that you would get, at friends' houses or at school or in your shopping. Homophobia was absolutely rife, absolutely, and we had. There are things that I know now. I had one of the boys at school in my year committed suicide later, and I strongly suspect it was because he was just very conflicted about his persona and his sexuality. I don't know that, but it was entirely believable that sort of stuff was happening. And also racism. We had riots in London, the Newham Riots. I think when I was 17, I was working in a clothes shop with a couple of black shop assistants, and I remember discussing it with them and trying to understand the anger, because I came from quite a, there just weren't minorities at that school. There were a few, but if there was a black guy, he would be the son of the Nigerian ambassador.
It wouldn't be somebody, just a normal, somebody who's in a working class or even middle class Londoner. I had a pivotal experience, which I can now, again, I don't want to over egg it because I could make it much more pivotal in retrospect. My parents were members of a diving club, Sabakwa Diving. And after going to train in the evenings, they would go to a pub with all the other divers, and the kids would have to go upstairs because we're not allowed in the pub. And one evening, and I was probably 12 or 13, there was a huge kerfuffle going on outside, shouting and running and whatever. And we kids looked out of the window, and there was a black guy being beaten up by the police. Rodney King version UK, not as severe perhaps or whatever, I came from, my background was the police are there to help. If you get lost, go and find a policeman. And suddenly, it was obvious that the guy, I don't know what he had done. He may have been a bad guy in some way in his life also. He may have done something awful, even to those, but he was immobilized. He was not armed. He was bent over the bonnet of a car, and he was having the living daylights beaten out of him by 3 or 4 policemen. And then so now I can say, oh, that was my enlightening. It wasn't, but it was a step. It was very shocking. And I don't know if you have come across, I wrote a piece in August 2015 about what I should have called inclusive energy. A piece where I said, look, we're not going to go through this transformation to clean energy and to a clean low carbon economy and have the same people running it afterwards as before. Not only would it be wrong, but it would be less effective because, I've been at World Economic Forum, I've been to sessions on the future of transport where there were probably 115 people, of whom 6 were women and none were people of color. And that's the World Economic Forum. And you sort of think, no, you're not going to develop an effective future of transportation by canvassing the thoughts of men born between the years of 1955 and 1975, white, mainly in the energy sector, mainly white, although not obviously around in other countries, but at that World Economic Forum, that's what it looked like. So I wrote this piece, and there was another vignette, another thing that really I definitely make have an effect, probably bigger than as a 12-year-old. When I was at the Associated Press, we were covering international news stories, and in 1996 or 1996, I think it was, Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was the environmental campaigner in Nigeria against the pollution in the Ogoni Delta, he was hanged. And it was pretty clear that at the time, Shell, who were effectively running a private army to protect their own installations, it was pretty clear that if they didn't push for it, they could probably have stopped it, since they were providing so much revenue to the government, and they didn't. And at the time, you just felt what probably a lot of people feel today still, just this sinking feeling, this disempowerment. But later, when I realized that clean energy actually works and you could do something about this, we don't have to pollute the Ogoni Delta, and we don't have to acquiesce in this brutality that is, frankly, a feature, not a bug, of the fossil fuel system. And so it was a step along a journey. So now, at New Energy Finance, I started to work towards 30% thought leaders to be women. I was very worried about the number because I thought, well, I'm going to do this, and then people are going to say, women are going to say, well, why not 50? How dare you? And I was very pleased because actually Helena Morrissey, who started the 30% Club, came up with the same number completely independently. And I've got to know her. She's the mother of one of the children in one of my daughter's schools. And so 30%, I then felt, okay, I'm really going to push this. And it took a long time. It probably took from, I'm going to say 2009, when I started banging on about it, to probably 2015 to get there, something like that. But, I went through the whole thing of the team saying, well, there aren't the women, and you can't, we can't put people on the stage who are not qualified. And I was like, don't, please, and I pushed them, and I came up with a few techniques, like, make a list of women that would be brilliant on stage and just invite them first. Yeah. Because then if they all say no, you can think about how have you been asking them? You can think about, well, maybe we don't do that panel. Once you've invited the top guys and you've got 4 people already on the panel, it's too late. And then you'll be scratching around and, and it's disrespectful just to get any old woman up on stage. So there were some things that I coached people to do. We got to the 30, and I think it's now higher than that, credit to the team. Actually, the guy who led that, Will Young, was one of the interns who joined NEF back in 2004. One of the very early interns led that, getting diverse thought leaders into the summit. What I would also say, you asked me about failures. I failed to work in the same way on minorities, on BAME, and on sexuality, on diverse sexuality, and also on neurodiversity, on disabled. I think we absolutely had. In fact, on the sexual orientation, there was a time when 2 of my 5 most senior staff were gay. So inadvertently, definitely, we were okay on that, but we didn't do anything explicit. There may have been others, disempowered or scared to talk out. So I think I could have done more on that. And certainly on minorities, I think I could have done more. Maybe not in terms of, did I hire the right people? Did I ever discriminate in a job interview or in assigning? I don't think that was it. We could have just talked to the core of this as an executive is you've got to talk about it. You've got to create a space where your team can talk about it and where you say, no, we're not going to make jokes about X. We're going to, and we're going to be respectful. And this is a completely legitimate topic of conversation. And then, that is very effective. And then you only have to intervene if it's really not working. You intervene, and I don't know whether that means quotas or whatever. But I think that creating the ability for your team to talk about it is absolutely the first, and showing some understanding, consciously thinking, okay, you interview somebody who has done their first degree in Nigeria and then they're at Imperial, and the way they talk, their phraseology there, it might be a little bit different than somebody who came through Cambridge and then went to do a master's at Imperial. And so you do have to do some conscious thought about, let's make sure I'm not unconsciously biased here. I've tried to do some of that with the team as well.
Yeah, I'm so happy. So many people are still.
Can I tell you that we've got a big problem? We've done all of this good stuff. I'll tell you another failure. I'm on the jury of the Bloomberg New Energy Pioneers, and we did a great job on thought leadership at the summit. And we struggled, and we still struggle, to get women entrepreneurs, C-suite entrepreneurs, but certainly CEO, chairman, founder. It's just year after year, we end up with, I would say, 1 or 2. And, and I'm going to be honest, 0, 1 or 2. And a few years back, I said, right, well, let's go through the entire funnel process and let's make sure that it isn't us. And, I think actually a lot of it is, I think the venture capital industry, has got issues with how many investing partners there are that are women and how many women entrepreneurs are being backed. And, because we really we reached out, we had folders of companies with women founders and CEOs, and we reached out and we asked them to apply because they had to put themselves forwards. And, so many of them just didn't. So there may be some cultural issues as well. But that's one that, I know great women entrepreneurs. I've got one in my angel portfolio right now who's done the most amazing pivot during COVID. She's gone from providing in-person coding camps to online coding camps and is, just without missing a beat, just brilliantly. She's just won a couple of awards as Entrepreneur of the Year. I don't need to say this, there are great women entrepreneurs, but there aren't enough of them. Yeah. And so that's an area that I would love to, I'd love to, if I can help, but I'd love to see it change. And I think minorities is a bit different, because by the time you say, well, there's all these kind of Indian, Asian entrepreneurs coming out of California, but does that apply across different minorities? Right. And I suspect, I haven't seen any data recently, but I suspect the answer is no. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy we had this conversation and so many people are still listening, because I think
That's still there, right?
it's so important. And I
Yeah.
actually hope that
I think
this could end up making it into the official recording.